Welcome to the WGBH News Studio at the Boston Public Library and here at the Newsfeed Cafe. My name is Craig Lemoult. I'm a reporter at WGBH, and I am so excited to be with you here in the studio, in the cafe, and on Facebook Live and on Twitter. And I couldn't be more thrilled to be here with our guest, Scott Simon of NPR. I want to say, first of all, I want to point out our conversation is in partnership with the American Inspiration Series by American Ancestors and with the Boston Public Library. Thank you so much for that support. You may not recognize our guest by his appearance, but as soon as he opens his mouth, you're going to recognize his voice if you're a public radio listener, because it's a warm and authoritative voice that has graced, I think, all of our Saturday mornings, certainly mine, and I hope yours as well. He's won every major award in broadcasting. He's also an acclaimed author of novels, nonfiction, memoirs, and plays as well. And his latest book is a novel for young readers called Sunnyside Plaza. And I'm thrilled that it brings a diehard Chicago Cubs fan to Red Sox Nation. Thank you for joining us, Scott Simon.
A Cubs fan feels pretty comfortable in Red Sox Nation.
Good. All right. Well, we're thrilled that you're here with us here at the Boston Public Library. So I want to start by talking about your new book, Sunnyside Plaza.
Yeah.
It is set in a group home for people with developmental disabilities.
Yeah.
And this is, it was inspired by an experience that you had, one of your first jobs, right? Can you tell us about that? Tell us about what you did.
When I was 19, I worked at a home for a residence for developmentally disabled adults, which I'm afraid is not how we put it in those days.
Yeah, right.
There was a much harsher phrase. And I was just transformed by what I saw and what I learned. I mean, it didn't happen all at once. And one of the things that I set up in the novel, but when I was being shown around in real life, on my first day, there was a table about this size, and it had a group of adults sitting around there, and they were painting and they were drawing. And the director of the home was showing me around, and some of the people were finger painting, and some of them were drawing pictures of cats and dogs and trees with crayons. And you know, as a parent, you see a child do that, and you think, oh my gosh, look at that, another Picasso. Oh my God, look at that, another Van Gogh. But you're rattled when you see a 50 or 60-year-old adult doing that, and you're filled with what I soon discovered was utterly misplaced pity, because within just 2 or 3 days, I learned that the people there were funny and bright and charming, and the audacity and the courage that it took for them just to get through an individual day, and how kind they were with each other, how they had no agenda with each other, how they saw through to each other's characters. You know, they weren't distracted by the insignificant stuff by which we sometimes identify and label people. And I thought it was one of the most valuable experiences of my life. I mean, as valuable as any war I've ever covered, any political campaign, any famous or self-important person I've ever interviewed. More valuable than most of that. And for years I've been looking for the right way to be able to tell a story that was set there. And it was finally, you know, the process of having children and reading books for young people myself with them. I understood that the books you read as a young person stay with you for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. I thought this was a story I wanted to stay with people. And I wanted to put myself inside another skin and heart, which is what I did with the character who's the narrator of the book. Her name is Sal Gal, or Sally Miyake. Yeah. Sal Gal is what they call her. It's her nickname. So it was a little while ago when you had this experience yourself. It was a little while, more than a little while ago.
And a lot's changed, I think, maybe not enough, in how we understand and probably the kinds of homes that are available now to people who have intellectual disabilities?
Yeah, are lots better. There are some homes that are still very much like Sunnyside Plaza. There are lots better options now. I'm particularly fond of a group. I don't know if they have homes here in Boston. I'd be surprised if they didn't. L'Arche, which is founded by Father Jean Vanier, a Jesuit priest who just died a few months ago, and they are residences for developmentally disabled adults, and they're very good. And there are others, and a lot of thinking has changed on that, and increasingly people who might be like Sal Gal are the the term is mainstreamed.
Yeah.
They actually are in some schools, and they meet other people, but it all depends on the the level of ability that they have, and it becomes one thing when they're younger. It becomes a little bit harder when they're older. And most of the people in this home are older.
Right. As you mentioned, the narrator of the book is one of the residents of the home, Sal Gal, and she's a 19-year-old woman who has an intellectual disability. What was it like for you to write in that voice? Was that a challenge?
Yes, it was a challenge, but it was a challenge that I wanted, because I think one of the most valuable things that novels can do, that literature can do, is to put us inside another skin, another heart, another set of eyes. And I also wanted somebody living in the home to be the narrative center of the story, if you will, to be the hero of the story.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have to anoint someone from the outside who would tell the story. I wanted, because there's a mystery at the heart of the story.
Right.
And I wanted the people who were in the home to be the instruments of figuring out what was going on, not to give anything away, but as they are.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't mention this to you before. I want to put you on the spot and ask you to read just a little bit, if that's okay. This is a scene where a young person, a child, comes into the house and interacts with
This is
with
George's
Sal.
son, I think?
Exactly. And I thought, from this point here about to just hear says a lot. If you would just start with that.
All right. George is the guy who delivers the vegetables and other canned goods to the home. In any event, Conrad is the cook there at the home, and Sal Gal works in Conrad's kitchen. And he brings his son one morning. I think, it's a teacher conference day, as I recall. Yeah. So his son is there with him, little boy. Conrad and George turned the corner, and I heard them begin to walk down the hall to see Mrs. Byrne. Chris is the little boy. Chris looked at me and took a step back and turned down his mouth. I can get you some milk, I told him. Little boy shook his head. Then he asked, you live here? Yes, I told him. I live here and work here and hang out here. Oh, said Chris, are you okay? I'm okay, I told him. I'm fine. My dad says there's something wrong with people here. I had a cold when it was cold out, I told Chris. I'm fine now. Whoops, I'm fine now. My dad says the people here can't understand me, so I shouldn't talk to you. I understand you, I told the little boy. Not every word or everything all the time, but I understand people. Little boy opened his eyes wide. We both heard Conrad and George as they came back in the hallway walking and laughing. Chris shook a little. I told the little boy, I won't say anything. George and Conrad turned the corner, still laughing. I turned away from the little boy and began to wipe down the smooth steel counter behind me.
I was going to actually add just that last part. I think is so touching.
So then Sal Gal says, I know more than I can say. I know things I don't know how to say. Even if I've heard words and know them, I can't always say them. Sometimes it feels like I have a rock inside that sits on words. But I hear things and see things. I notice and figure out things. It's all here, inside.
I just thought that was really, I feel like you've really gotten inside this character and how she feels about how she's understood by the outside world. And I was wondering if did you speak to people about their experience of not being, understood and appreciated for who they are?
I never said you feel you were understood.
Yeah.
I could observe when I worked at the home that, workmen would come in from the outside to repair something, and they had heard that there was something special about the home. And so they would ask, what I thought was particularly funny is that they would sometimes stop one of the residents and ask, well, what kind of people live here? What's going on here? Is this a place for crazy people or something?
Yeah.
And a lot of the residents just, sitting there or just walking from point A to point B in the home. But, I thought for some time, well, they must not know what they mean. What I discovered is that, yes, they did know what they meant. They were just nice. They, in a funny way, they knew they couldn't explain it, so they just looked past it. And that was part of the grace that I grew to admire. In recent years, when my wife and I have had dinner at large houses, which a friend of ours run a large house in Washington, D.C., you overhear more than hear sometimes the people there talking about that. They don't say they don't understand me. What they'll sometimes say is something like, yeah, he said hello, but he doesn't know us. He doesn't know us.
He doesn't know us.
Yeah.
I guess that's something that runs throughout, is that there are moments where people are ignorant and they say unkind things.
Yeah.
But there's also moments of real kindness in your book.
And that was my experience. Yes, I didn't want it to seem as if the entire outside world was suspicious and skeptical and harsh towards the folks who live in a place like Sunnyside Plaza, because it had certainly been my experience. When we went out on field trips.
Your phone is ringing.
This is Katy Perry. Not Katy Perry, but it's Katy Perry. It's firework, and my wife is calling.
Yeah.
Oh, this is hilarious.
There you go.
I'm sorry. I'm a professional. That's sort of,
Does your wife know that that's your ring for when she calls?
Oh, of course she does.
Oh,
yes, of course she does. Yeah,
Because she's never with you when she calls you. So maybe
but she sometimes does it to amuse people. She'll say, "You won't believe what my husband has on his phone," and she'll call me, and
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I should have. Isn't the first thing you do turn off the phone?
Mine's off. I don't know.
All right.
I don't know what you're doing.
Could everybody out there make certain that their phones are off?
When it happens during Weekend Edition, then you'll know.
You'll know what happened.
You'll
when
know
you hear
what's
Katy
going on when
Perry
Katy
singing.
Perry's
Yeah.
on there.
I did it with my daughters. I can't.
All right, but we were talking about the moments, and I guess one of the things I was thinking about was, do you feel that, like, is there more of that? Is there more of the kindness than the ignorance right now in society? Are we?
Well,
where are we? Where are we going right now? Are we?
Right now in society, I think I'd have to be careful about answering that.
Yeah.
But because there seems to be an awful lot of meanness, connected meanness, going on in this world. It was my experience when in the home, when I worked at what was called the Approved Home at 909 West Wilson, which is about 4 blocks from the street, which actually exists, Sunnyside Avenue. We would go out to Wrigley Field for baseball games. We would go out for, let's say, a church or a synagogue picnic or event, get invited. That when people met the people from the home, they were so open and so direct and so honest, and that people were charmed, that people immediately, the defenses came down.
Right.
In not only the best people, but I think most people. And I wanted that to be reflected. At one point, I have people who live in Sunnyside Plaza go out into the world, the big wicked city of Chicago on the north side, and they go into a bar.
Yeah.
And people there are nice. They're a little bit curious, but they're nice. They go into a religious mission, storefront church.
Go to a Chinese restaurant.
Same thing.
Yeah.
They go to a Chinese restaurant,
Yeah.
Peking Duke's, another one of my favorite names. And in Peking Duke's, there is a woman, who is scared and shouts something at them. I have a scene where they have a picnic in the park, and somebody shouts something, and to try and be fair to this fictitious character, I think she was worried about her daughter. And I know that can set off alarm bells in people. But I remember when my mother, must be said my late mother, met me at Sunnyside Plaza one night. I was getting off work. I was working an earlier shift. And my mother didn't need the 2 or 3 days of acclimation and learning that I needed. She understood immediately that the people she was meeting were to be cherished and were to be respected and loved. And she was just wonderful saying hello to them and talking to them. And I like to think that a lot of people left to their own best devices would be like my mother.
I feel like that point that once people get to know them and understand them, that they come to appreciate them and be kind to them, is true across the board, right? It's not. It's certainly not limited to people with intellectual disabilities. It's true of all, differences that we fear, those things that we don't understand. And as soon as we meet somebody who's different from us and learn, it spoke to me beyond just the subject matter. That I thought it said something about understanding and kindness that sort of transcended this.
I'm glad, and I hope, because one of the things that I thought look, and I say this as the father of daughters who happen to be Asian. I think it's important for youngsters to read books in which they see people get to know characters who look like they do. I also think it's important for youngsters to read books where they meet and get to know characters who look nothing like they are, who are, they think, nothing like they are, and read their stories and get to know them and get to hear their voices and understand, you know, that's not true. There are actually a lot of similarities, and that to me makes a novel worth doing. That I hope is an act of empathy and inspiration, imagination. That, you know, and that's what a novel and that's what stories can do.
Yeah. I neglected to mention, by the way, that we are taking questions for Scott Simon. So
I wonder if my wife was calling with a question.
She might have a question for you.
Yeah.
If here in the Newsfeed Cafe, if you have a question, there's someone going around collecting your questions right now. And also on Facebook and on Twitter, you can add your questions there, and we will be asking those questions as well. This is a great question that I'm sure you've been asked before, but it's I'd love to know your answer. If you could interview any person now alive, who would it be?
Well, this week it would probably be Mike Pompeo.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that too.
But I somehow don't think that that's in the offing.
No.
I think without giving it too much thought, I'd like to interview Angela Merkel.
Yeah. Why?
She'll be leaving office soon. I think I don't mean to speak like I have a lot of knowledge of German affairs, but she's been there for her leadership has been there for a long time through a lot of different tests and challenges, and I think she has the respect of much of the world, and I would like to know how she sees that experience, and you know, and without getting too political, obviously there has been an upsurge in a kind of, I think sometimes the darker aspect of nationalist and populist feeling. Some people obviously see it in the United States. It might be easier for some people in America to see it in Brazil, in the Philippines, in Great Britain, in parts of Europe, including Germany, where she still remains in power. And I would like to see find out from her what she foresees for the future. I mean, when it gets to, you know, I've been very lucky. I mean, I've been able to interview. I mean, I never got a chance to interview Frank Sinatra, and I guess I never will. Look, there was a great piece
written by someone who never got a chance to interview Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra Has a Cold by Gay Talese.
Oh, by Gay Talese,
did a whole
because
profile of him. I never really got to interview him, actually.
Right, Sinatra kept him at arm's length. But I thought about the other day, in fact, here in Boston at the JFK Library, a few months ago, I interviewed Michael Collins, who, of course, was the third man aboard Apollo and stayed on Apollo. He didn't get into the lunar landing module. But I have, in my repertorial lifetime, I've interviewed all people in that first moon mission.
Really?
So, yes, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and finally Michael Collins, just a wonderful guy, by the way. What have I got to complain about?
Yeah,
you
right.
know, I mean, how many people can say that? So I consider myself very blessed.
Well, I hope your producers...
And I interviewed Katy Perry.
And, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I hope your producers are watching and they get to work booking Angela Merkel. Hopefully that one will come through, you know, sometime very soon. You know, I want to ask you one more thing about Sunnyside Plaza before really we move on, which is that it's also a novel that's written for a young audience, and it deals with some very serious subjects, including death.
Yeah.
And I wondered about both the experience of writing that and trying to, you know, if there was sort of if you're trying to navigate some difficult things while writing that. And then also, you know, I know you're on a book tour now and you're reading to some young audiences about you know, meeting young people and reading this to them, what that's been like. Well,
at first, I have loved going to schools and talking to youngsters about Sunnyside Plaza. I think it's just great. I mean, a book tour in schools is just great. You get wonderful questions, like with all due regard to your questions, which are great.
Thank you.
Young man the other day raised his hand and said, "Oh, what size shoes do you wear?" I thought that was brilliant. you know, I said the next time I interview a government official, I'm going to ask that.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask that question. Alas, I was interviewing Stephen Groves, the deputy White House assistant, and the subject just didn't come up because I had too much else to talk to him about.
Well.
But so I love that. You know, yes, because the mystery at the heart of it, there are people who begin to disappear and the specter of death is raised. And I guess I've become, because I am in the middle of a book tour, I find myself taking that question and getting a little bit more emphatic and saying, you know, you can't hide death from youngsters.
Yeah.
They learn about it. I mean, I speak from my own experience that all our daughters, for example, have, alas, relatively young as they are, have already lost all of their grandparents and cousins in the family that they loved and other people who were dear to them. And we love animals in our family, also dear pets. And I think I have no problem saying to youngsters in a totally friendly way, it's the knowledge that we don't live forever that makes life precious and worth living. Yeah. Because as I've said to kids in schools, look, if we lasted forever, we'd never do anything. We'd never get out of bed. We'd never go to school, which sounds pretty good to youngsters. They're missing class, they're missing you. But that's the whole thing that gives life sense. It's the whole thing that propels us forward. The knowledge that we don't have all the time in the world is what makes us use the time we have to try and do something. And I think that's something that children can get a hold of, and I have no problem raising it in this book.
That's great. There's a lot I want to ask you about radio, but before we get to radio, actually, there's one more book I want to ask you about. We're now celebrating, I think, the 10th anniversary of your memoir, Baby, We Were Meant for Each Other, which...
I'm smiling because my beautiful wife and our beautiful oldest daughter, it's on. It's being shown now there. Oh my God, they're both gorgeous, aren't they? Yep. It is the one good picture I have ever taken in my life.
It is a great picture.
The only valuable picture I've ever taken.
So the book is, as it says, in praise of adoption. You adopted both of your daughters. They were both from China.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I mentioned it. This is a special meaning to me because I was reading this book while on leave with my own son, who my wife and I adopted in August. And
God bless.
It's an amazing book, and it really spoke to me and the experience that we've had, and I think that adoptive parents have had, and I think it's actually has a lot to say to people who don't have adoption necessarily in their family. Yeah. Although I will say,
so many do,
just walking around in the world, I've been shocked. People come up to me and say like, "Oh, my mother was adopted. My brother was." You know, there's so much more adoption around us than I ever knew or appreciated before.
I mean, there is certainly a national statistic, but I noticed just the other night, our oldest daughter, who was the little baby that my wife is holding aloft there, had a dance at her high school. She goes to an all-girls school, so they had, what are they called, dates, you know, boys from neighboring schools. And they all posed for a picture because they came over to dinner at our apartment beforehand. And of the 12 youngsters that were there, we happened to know that 4 had been adopted. By the way, each from different places. And that's just America. That's just life. I think it's great.
Why did you decide that this was a story you wanted to tell in a book form? Your family, it's not just your family. You profile other adoptive families as well. But this is something that you felt very strongly about.
Yes, because my wife and I grew to feel very strongly about the good adoption can do the world. And look, I have respect for anybody who has a family in any way. But my wife and I had both been in a position in our lives to know how many children there are around the world who need loving arms around them, who need and deserve a family, someone to love them. And we just grew to feel that nothing could do more good for the world than having more of these children in the arms of families who love them. Simple as that. And I think when my wife and I adopted a child, lots of people sent us breathless, often privately published adoption books, and they were beautiful, and we appreciated all of them. But they tend to end from the moment an infant or a child is placed into the arms of the parents. which is a little bit like, love stories where the couple meet.
Yeah,
if you
at the
just
end of the
end
movie.
story,
Yeah,
at
right,
the end
exactly.
of the movie. And so we wanted to write something that, that went through the life cycle a little bit more, because there are challenges along the road, as there are in anyone.
Yeah.
For any family growing up. But we just began to feel so strongly that it's hard to think of something that would do better for more people. And I understand people who, look, I'm very frank in the book. My wife and I tried to start our family in the traditional biblical manner, begatting, and it didn't work out. And then we went through a couple of rounds in the lab. By the way, you made jokes about people would recognize me. I will never forget the moment. They give you a cup that's not unlike this. I can't believe I'm talking about this. and, and there are magazines in there that are not The Economist.
Nope.
And although for some people, maybe The Economist does it. I don't know. In any event, so I gave the cup to the young man there, and he said, "Oh," and wrote down the slip, and he said, "Oh, these Scott Simon, huh?" And I thought, of all the ways to be recognized, this
not
is
the place
for
that.
However, we tried that, and I think for people, who try that, I hope it works, and I have a world of respect. But we wanted to tell the world there are children out there now.
Yeah.
You don't have to go through that. There are children who need our love that are out there now. You can add to your family. You can begin your family as we did. There are children out there now who need us.
Yeah, you get to both to have the family that you want, but also to provide that family to a child who really needs it.
I can't believe I talked about it. Oh, well, yeah.
So I want to transition into.
I got to tell you, it's a little hard to take a sip now.
Yeah,
but
right.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Tainted.
I am really sorry. Can I say to the people here?
I want to transition to your journalism career
I
on the
notice
radio.
you're finding it a little hard to take a sip too, aren't you? Sorry.
So most
it
people.
didn't take me long just to bring the level
Just to
of
bring
this
it down
down.
a little bit. We were up here. And,
yeah, I know. Sorry,
No, we'll get back there. Most people who hear your voice, know you from Saturday mornings, we listen to you, and it's just your voice fills our home on Saturday morning. You're like part of our weekend routine, right? And I think that's true of so many homes in America, and that must be kind of a special thing. And I guess I wanted to start by asking you just. I think it'd be interesting to hear a little bit of the behind the scenes of how that show happens every week, right? People don't know what goes into it. You don't just show up on Saturday. You're working all week long on this thing,
And you'd be
right?
amazed how many people think I just show up 5 minutes ahead of time.
Yeah, right.
And
So, can you just kind of give us a
Sure.
little scene, what it's like?
Because it's a weekly show, we never stop planning. Yeah. The first day of work is ostensibly Tuesday, but by the time we leave the office, certainly by the time I leave the office on Saturday, we have certain things that are already pinned up on the board. Typically, they tend to be book interviews or music interviews or actor-director interviews. And then the hardest thing is to figure out what's going to be relevant and pertinent by Saturday morning.
Right.
There's a great deal as we sit here, and I'm not on the air this Saturday, but as we sit here now, there is a great deal of interest, and there should be, obviously, in the impeachment trial.
Sure.
The impeachment trial might be over on Saturday morning. And that doesn't mean that our show won't do anything about it, but it'll obviously be different than if it were ongoing. You certainly couldn't record an interview about it today that you'd want to hear on Saturday morning. Right. And that's that's kind of the challenge that we go through. We have talented producers, talented editors, and we never stop thinking, or they never stop thinking. I, as you know, stop thinking at the drop of a hat. Or worse, I come up with even, in any event. And they're terrific and brilliant, and there's a nice balance between people who've been with us for a long time and people who just joined us last week. And all of that is wonderful. I have very few useful ideas. But our producers have all kinds of interesting ideas,
Right.
and they keep me in touch with things in the world that I wouldn't know otherwise.
You alluded to an interview from just this past Saturday with, I think it was the Deputy Press Secretary for the White House.
Yeah, Stephen Groves.
Which was a pretty tense interview, and that was following another even more tense
Yes.
interview that one of your colleagues had with Secretary Pompeo. And I guess, and also you've been hearing you during the week actually doing some of the live coverage of the impeachment hearings as they're going on. What is it like for you in this moment in history to be in the position that you're in and to see what's happening and to also report on it? What's it like from your chair?
Well, I mean, I have been off this week.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I think any news organization gets upset if they think they are becoming the story, and I think we want to avoid that. If I could interview Secretary Pompeo, I hope I would do a good job and would ask him the questions that need to be asked. Mm-hmm. The thing that concerns me is I think there's some voices in this country that express an utter contempt for the press. Mm-hmm. An active adversarial relationship with the press that makes me very uncomfortable and makes it more difficult, I think, for us to do our jobs in a responsible manner. All of that being said, I think it's important for Americans to realize this is not Russia, this is not the Philippines, this is not Mexico. Reporters here are not thrown out of windows. There is absolutely nothing that Secretary Pompeo can do to Mary Louise Kelly or any other reporter. I mean, he can keep Michelle Kellerman, our fine State Department reporter, off of his airplane, but he can't keep her from reporting. Mm-hmm. And that's the great thing about America. There is no need for us to be scared by any of this. Can I quote a Chicago Bear here?
Please.
Rather than the New England Patriots, they're called,
I
right?
believe that's the correct, yes.
As the great Walter Payton, the great Chicago Bear running back, used to say, you just take the hits and keep on going. Mm-hmm. That's what I think.
We have a great question here. Has any one interview impacted you in a big way?
Well, I mean, a lot of interviews have affected me emotionally. Obviously the Bill Cosby interview I did had a lot of impact because it particularly introduced me to a lot of people around the country who didn't like the interview at all.
Yeah.
Why did you ask that question? Why did you denigrate a great, beloved national symbol? I think there's less of that now, obviously, because the court case was decided. Years ago in Sarajevo, I did a number of interviews with families, and particularly two young teenagers named Irina and Amala. And I wound up borrowing their names and writing a novel about the siege of Sarajevo. Mm. So the real life Irina and Amala had a very deep impact, as Sarajevo did, on how I see the world. And I think there are in our profession, as I don't have to tell you, we often feel, well, if the world just knew the truth, they would do something about it. Mm-hmm. And I think the world knew about the terrible crimes that were going on in Bosnia and Sarajevo and chose to do nothing about it. I mean, I remember those years. And, we can't get involved. Oh, those people, they don't have vowels in their last names. What can you do? And arguably the same thing is happening or has happened already in Syria. The same thing might be happening in Yemen. I mean, the fact is we have more ability than ever before to tell stories around the world and bring them to people live, and it doesn't prevent people from turning away. In fact, I sometimes worry, which was the theme of my novel in Sarajevo, that particularly intelligent people look for qualifiers and way to talk themselves out of doing anything. I remember hearing, oh yes, the losses in Bosnia are just terrible, but I bet you, there are more people who die of traffic accidents in the United States, which statistically might be true, and so what?
But it's not relevant.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But smart people can sometimes use their intelligence to come up with reasons to avoid doing anything.
Yeah, to rationalize things that they wouldn't. otherwise. You know, you mentioned your war reporting. I believe you've reported from 10 wars, is
10
that right?
wars, yeah.
We have a question from another viewer asking, what did you learn from your reporting from war zones?
Well, I mean, I think I learned that the world is perfectly capable of you know, turning away from suffering, and that distressed me. I think the one thing I take from so many wars I've covered is the epical bravery and kindness and awful simple human courtesy of people who are living in what we call zones of conflict. It's absolutely amazing. I mean, I remember when I interviewed people in Sarajevo, because you couldn't interview people as a rule on the street because there was sniper and artillery fire going on the street. So you would have to go into apartment buildings, apartment blocks, knock on doors. And you know, they would say, oh, you must have a cup of coffee. Now, a cup of coffee was very hard to come by in Sarajevo because there was nothing, you know, the relief supplies were coming in on UN flights, but I guarantee you they weren't bringing Dunkin' with them. And so coffee was very precious and hard to come by, and yet they had a visitor and they were going to serve them coffee. And I was just in awe of that kind of courtesy. And I knew it in El Salvador, I knew it in Ethiopia. I remember being in a feeding camp in what's now Eritrea. And we were talking to some of the people there. This was during Ethiopia and Eritrea's civil war and famine. And I smelled espresso. And then I heard the that we hear back there. And I said, I'm smelling things. And I'm also hearing things.
It's a hallucination by smell.
And in fact, there was an Eritrean refugee family that was making espresso. It's a coffee culture, Ethiopia and Eritrea, and they were making espresso. And you know, they were human beings. I mean, we put them under that label refugee as if they're devoid of all kind of human interests. And my producer and I came over and we said, you're making, and of course we joined them for coffee.
Yeah, right.
Of course, absolutely. And they insisted on it. And here were people with almost nothing to their names. And we were, you know, coming in from the outside and knew we would be leaving at some point. And we were just blessed to be able to join them for that cup of coffee, which was good, by the way.
It was good coffee?
Yeah, it was good coffee.
I feel like in that story and on your radio program and in your books, there's the same general idea that people are people, and it comes from a place of your ability to see through other people's eyes and to give them a voice, and it's empathy, I think, is what it is. But that's what I hear when I listen to your show, and that's what I read in your books.
I hope. I don't know. I don't give it. I don't give it any thought. You know, this being a small world, there was a very nice review of Sunnyside Plaza that was in the Wall Street Journal. Except the viewer did say there is sometimes the warmth and love slops over a little bit, but most readers won't mind. Okay, so that appeared in the weekend edition of the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
Not this last, but the weekend before last. This last Thursday, they had a mother-daughter literary dinner at our daughter's high school, and the speaker was the Wall Street Journal critic. So, in any event, she's going around saying hello to people, and she sees the name tag Simon. And, you know, people know our family. And she goes, oh, you're not related, are you? And my wife said, yes, as a matter of fact, I'm his wife. This is his, you know, oldest daughter, Elise. So good to meet you. And she said, well, I loved the book, but I had to get that one dig in. And my wife said, oh, believe you me, I know. My husband is the most sentimental man in the world. I find it hard to take. So I'm surrounded on that side. But in any event, yeah, you know, that's just
But
me.
we as
I was doing an interview about Sunnyside Plaza with Noel King for Morning Edition.
Sure.
And I came back up to our office area and I was still crying. And our producer said, how did the interview go? And I said, well, I guess I began to cry, and they all began to go, oh, big, hairy deal. We knew you'd begin to cry. Oh, God. I mean, they sometimes joke with me about, oh, this will get old Scooter
right.
to sob and that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Well, I feel like I, as an interviewer, have not done my job sufficiently because I haven't really gotten you to just maybe,
I did for a moment.
just a
yeah.
touch.
Yeah, I did.
Just a touch.
I did for a moment.
Well,
I am not going to cry in Red Sox country.
we're strong here.
Yeah,
in
right.
Boston. Well,
Wait, Red Sox.
Sox.
Yeah.
Thank
Sox.
you for coming here to Boston. Thank you for
pleasure.
coming here and speaking with us at the Boston Public Library and WGBH. The book is wonderful. In fact, actually, if you're here in the studio, I believe Scott will be signing some copies of the book. So please stick around, and he will be signing copies. And for those of you joining us on Facebook and Twitter, thanks so much for tuning in. And you can find his book, and you can find him on Saturday mornings on NPR. Thanks for joining us, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks.
It was wonderful. Thanks so much.
It was great.